Good afternoon. I'd like to reconvene the Monterey County Board of Supervisors here at 1:30. You have the roll call, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Let the record represent all supervisors are present with the exception of Supervisor Adams.
Thank you. And the Spanish interpretation announcement, Diego.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Diego Celis. Seré su intérprete inglés-español, español-inglés para la reunión de hoy. Si usted está planeando hacer un comentario y necesita servicio de intérprete, por favor hablar lenta y suficientemente fuerte para que yo le escuche. Favor hacer una pausa al final de sus oraciones para asegurarse de que tengo la oportunidad de interpretarle. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. As announced at 10:30, we have a slight change in the agenda here for this afternoon. We're moving item 30, which is the presentation from the Department of Emergency Management on the Pajaro Unmet Needs Disaster Assistance Program to 1:30 to start with. It needs a 4/5 vote to pass. We are missing one supervisor today. A little later this afternoon, we're going to be missing another, so we need to bring this up to the first item on the agenda to make sure we have a proper quorum for the vote. Yes, and we also will have item 29 follow that, which also needs a 4/5 vote. And then we will take up number 28, which is considering the adoption of the ordinance amending the Title 21 on Monterey County for mitigation requirements for development of farmland. So we will now begin with item 30, which is receive a presentation from the Department of Emergency Management and the Workforce Development Board on the Pajaro Unmet Needs Disaster Assistance Program.
Thank you very much. Could you please share the screen? So today we are here to talk about Assembly Bill 102 regarding the Pajaro flood relief funds. The funds were essentially allocated for the county to provide unmet needs, or sorry, Lori, can you go to the next slide, please?
I did. I just need to figure out the controls.
Yes, we're going to switch. Sorry. We're essentially provided to the county to meet community needs for recovery and resilience that were not available through previously established federal, state, and local programs. Through a 6-month community engagement process, we presented to the Board of Supervisors a list of projects to be approved and allocated with the funds to increase community resilience and assist with immediate recovery needs. And so we do want to highlight some of the Assembly Bill 102 requirements, which is that it does need to be dispersed in the community of Pajaro. There is to be no duplication or replacement of benefits currently available or currently received through other existing programs. Must be expended by December 31st, 2025, and they are subject to state audit. And we leveraged the priorities that are listed on this screen to ensure that the projects that were presented to the board and approved were in fact a one-time project. They were feasible within the grant guidelines, and they provided direct support to the community and had significant impact on the immediate recovery need, and that there was no other available funding. Upon approval by the board in December, these are the projects that were approved. Staff began working diligently to address the top 3 projects, which were unmet flood recovery needs, small business flood recovery, and the community grant program. And so today we're here to present on the top 2 items in terms of how we plan to implement this program in alignment with the grant guidelines and current available programs at the state and federal level. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Laura Emmons, our Emergency Services Manager, to present the program to you, and then Chris Donnelly to talk about the Business Assistance Program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kelsey. And so I'm going to start on the Pajaro Unmet Needs Disaster Assistance Program. So following the approval in December of 2023 of the allocation of $10 million to support both small business and individual recovery, staff began working diligently with the Workforce Development Board and our community partners to develop what this program will look like. We also met with the County of Merced, who is similarly developing a program, I would say a very similar program, and then Cal OES and FEMA to really understand, what was possible within the grant requirements. And today we're here to present on what that really looks like. So the assistance will be in two large categories, one being the individual and household assistance program, which will have about $6 million in funding, and then the small business assistance program, which will have a $4 million allocation. So I'm going to start with the FEMA sequence of delivery. So as we know, one of the main requirements of this grant funding is no duplication of benefits. And FEMA uses this really helpful process to ensure that there is not a duplication of benefits. So by having assistance phased in a specific order, it ensures that assistance occurs and does not duplicate additional or already pre-existing assistance. So what we're trying to do with the county's unmet needs program is really plug assistance into the bottom of that sequence of delivery. And that's really what unmet needs assistance is. It's that delta between all assistance that individuals have received from government disaster assistance programs and what they need to meet their true recovery need from the disaster. And disaster case management is a really important tool. As you can see, this is quite a complicated sequence, and many disaster survivors, for very obvious reasons, struggle through how to maximize their own assistance throughout this sequence. And disaster case management is a FEMA-funded program that's then contracted through the California Department of Social Services and provides assistance to disaster survivors in navigating all disaster assistance available to them, developing a recovery plan. It helps ensure that there is no duplication of benefits. And so I would really like to highlight how exciting and innovative this partnership with DCM is. They are already contracted through FEMA and the state to provide assistance to survivors in determining what their unmet need is and addressing it and finding assistance that plugs in. So by leveraging this exciting partnership, we can really maximize the assistance that's provided both to the community with these dollars and help individuals maximize their own assistance they can receive across the entire sequence of delivery. So we are really excited about this partnership. So I'm going to get in now to what this program really looks like. So it is, as I noted, unmet needs assistance for those who have suffered losses related to the breach of the Pajaro levee, and it is available regardless of citizenship status, really with the main eligibility being that one was living as their primary residence in Pajaro at the time of the disaster, and that they do have losses directly related to the failure of the Pajaro levee. And this is really going to happen in 4 big operational phases. We will open a county application for assistance. We'll have phase 1 of assistance, which is really focused on support for everyone who was evacuated due to the evacuation order in the community of Pajaro. Those who have suffered flood damages will be referred to the disaster case management team, who will then assist them with eligibility for phase 2 assistance. So phase 1 assistance is evacuation food spoilage assistance, and this is a really exciting type of assistance. I think the goal here is really to help assist everyone who was evacuated in the community in a way that this is not a type of assistance offered by FEMA or the state. So the goal here is to make a really easy, approachable type of assistance without spending a lot of time going through a really detailed duplication check. So it is really meant so that we can help get assistance into the community quickly, and that will really be the focus of phase 1. For phase 2, it's focused on households who did suffer physical flood losses, and disaster case management will work with them on additional verification and eligibility and ensuring the no duplication of benefits. And this will be across 4 large categories. So home repair assistance will be, as it sounds, assistance with home repairs related to the flood impacts. This is for primary owner-occupied residences. The repairs cannot be made to repair to a non-permitted condition, but we do have funding set aside if people would like to ensure their structure gets up to code as part of this process. And the assistance is really determined the assistance amount will be determined on individual need. And so we'll really look at how much assistance did individuals get from FEMA, from insurance, and how much do they need to get their structure to that pre-disaster condition. Vehicle repair and replacement is for vehicles to be repaired and replaced if they were damaged or destroyed by the flood event. The vehicle must be owned or leased by the applicant and registered as of March 10th, 2023, and it is limited to a maximum of 2 vehicles per household. But that assistance amount is similar to home repair based on the actual repair costs or a trade-in value for the vehicle, assuming it was not flood damaged. For housing assistance and personal property, I believe these will likely be the most common forms of phase 2 assistance. They have a combined categorical maximum award of $15,000. And for housing assistance, it is reimbursement for costs between March 10th and May 15th to move to a new permanent residence if they were permanently displaced due to flood impacts, or housing arrears related to the cumulative impact that flood damages, repairs, being displaced for an extended period of time may have had on that individual household. And then lastly, personal property assistance is similar to as it sounds, assistance to repair and replace personal property, generally appliances, clothing, room furnishings, essential tools, accessibility items. And that is calculated using a fixed cost associated with each of the items. So I provided a couple examples so that you can generally understand what this might look like. For example, family A, who was evacuated from their home, and they did lose food while they were evacuated, so they would be eligible for the phase 1 $600 grocery gift card. And then for phase 2, they had home repairs of $20,000, lost personal property of around $12,000, and their vehicle was destroyed, which was a vehicle costing around $10,000. The case managers will then include assistance they have received. So in this example, they received $7,000 for their home from insurance, $3,000 from FEMA. They also received FEMA funding for personal property and donated items, and the car was uninsured, but they did receive a small FEMA award for $2,000. So once the case managers look at that total loss amount minus that assistance already received, this case in phase 2 would be eligible for about $25,000. I bring up example B since we do know this is not a primarily homeowner community and there's a much larger renter population. So family B is a renting household. They were also evacuated and lost food, so they are eligible for that $600 grocery gift card. Then they were permanently displaced from their disaster-affected address, so their cost to move, that deposit and first month's rent cost them $10,000. This is a larger family, so they lost $16,000 in personal property and had more minor vehicle damages costing around $2,000. Similarly, the case managers would look at the assistance they've received. So they received FEMA rental assistance of approximately $5,000. They received some nonprofit moving assistance of around $1,000. They similarly received FEMA and some donations related to personal property and a minor insurance amount for their damaged vehicle. This is where you can see that combined categorical maximum on housing and personal property comes into play. So that subtotal was $17,000. It is then capped at the $15,000, making this household eligible for a total of $16,000 in phase 2. Example C I bring up because it is also, another case we might see. This family was evacuated from their home and did lose food while they were evacuated. They would be eligible for that phase 1 assistance. Luckily, they did not have flood damages, which is very exciting for family C, but they unfortunately would not be eligible for any phase 2 assistance. So to be eligible for assistance, people do need to apply. We'll be opening an application center in late March of this year. Households are eligible for multiple assistance categories if they provide verification for eligibility. For all assistance and on the application, we'll be asking for 2 main items, which is proof of identity and then proof that they were living in Pajaro as of March 10th. Again, that is not citizenship. It is just that they were a resident in the area. And then for phase 2, they'll work with their case manager for additional verification on their impacts related to the flood, financial need, and then information on any duplicative assistance or benefits that they might have received. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Donnelly on the Small Business Disaster Assistance Program. And I just want to highlight how excited we are to be working with the Workforce Development Board and all of the experience they've brought to this from their COVID grants as well. So it's been a great add.
Thank you, Laura. So the Small Business Disaster Program is going to be in 2 phases. One phase is loss and damages, and then phase 2 will be beautification. And part of the criteria is that businesses must be based in Pajaro in operation prior to March 10th, 2023. Priority for businesses owners who live in Monterey County or live within 20 miles of Pajaro. Sorry. Applications are required. Documentation must be submitted online. So we're going through a process similar to what we did for our COVID grant, is that all applications we've submitted online. We just don't want to take the risk of having paper receipts or other receipts that we might have. So we're requiring everything will go online. In-person orientations will be scheduled to review grant eligibility, guidelines, and requirements. And staff will be working and be available on site. So we'll be co-located with Laura and her team and Kelsey's team to be able to assist individuals by appointments. And also we're looking at walk-in as assistance as well and completing their submissions. So the Workforce Board staff will be there to assist them with their submission of their required paperwork and documentation. So next. So for losses and damages, we're looking at $3.2 million that'll be available. And the grant guidelines that we're looking at, applications are all required. Documentation must be submitted online, as I mentioned earlier. Government-issued photo identification is required. 2022 tax returns, proof of payments for eligible expenses are required. And then we're looking at the date of submittal for receipts will be from March 10th through December 31st, 2023. And the breakdown, what we're looking at, funding breakdown, is for storefront businesses. That'll be about $85,000 maximum. And that'll be for inventory, that is including goods available for sale that were damaged or lost and need to be replenished. And then again, receipts will be required. Equipment damages or lost property, such as refrigerators, display counters, machineries, and others, again, will be requiring receipts. Revenue, and we're looking at sales lost as a direct result of the flooding and its aftermath. And we'll look at the quarterly sales reports required to demonstrate reduction in revenue. And we'll be looking at the period from March 10th through March 31st of 2023 as a process for reviewing that. And then building damages, repair of the exterior, interior of a building, receipts and photos are going to be required to demonstrate there was damages to the building and then also the after effects of the completing. And we also have another funding level is for home-based businesses, since we notice there is businesses in Pajaro that are home-based, and we want to be able to provide them with additional resources for them to continue their business or to be able to replenish computers, laptops, printers, copiers, and other inventory for that. One of the things that we're looking at is all the repairs for the beautification and required work for the building damages will need to be completed by a licensed contractor. And also, we want to make sure that the business owner does not, get written approval prior to that, because we don't want to see the landlord raising the rent or evicting the tenant after some of the work has been completed. Next is the beautification, and we have available $500,000. That would be fun. And so again, the grant guidelines are, again, losses and damages, and phase 2 funding is only available for storefront businesses. So that would not be available for homefront businesses. Storefront businesses may submit one application for phase 1 and phase 2. And what we're looking at is exterior, interior painting, landscaping, fascia, signage. And again, we would want to have quotes for the work prior to it, and that at that time of submission with their grant application, they could submit those quotes for looking for payments. So that'll be it.
So next steps, so assuming the board moves forward with this item, we will be working on an extensive community outreach campaign in the month of March that will include 4 informational sessions for the community, opening a public hotline, creating flyers and public outreach materials to distribute amongst the community. And then we will be moving forward with opening that application center that's been mentioned a few times, where our staff at the Department of Emergency Management and the Workforce Development Board will co-locate for a 30-day application period, where we'll have the site open 5 days a week. We'll have a translation and bilingual materials available there, and individuals can come in and complete both that initial household assistance application as well as the business assistance application. And that brings me to the very long slide of recommendations, which I can read through, which is to execute agreements with Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Monterey and Community Bridges for $3 million to administer the Pajaro Unmet Needs Individual and Household Program, to authorize the Auditor Controller to issue a payment to both Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Monterey and Community Bridges in the amount of $750,000 to expedite payments for disaster assistance claims in Phase 2, authorize the Director of the Department of Emergency Management to sign up to 4 amendments to those agreements where the total amount does not exceed the aggregate combined contract amount, and then authorize the Auditor Controller to increase the appropriations for this fiscal year in the Department of Emergency Management budget by $3 million for the Individuals and Household Disaster Assistance Program, financed by the AB 102 grant funds. And then similarly for the Small Business Program, authorize and direct the Auditor Controller to increase appropriations and revenues by $3 million in the County Administrative Office Workforce Development Board adopted budget, also financed by the AB 102 grant funds, and direct the Auditor Controller to expedite payments issued in support of the Pajaro Unmet Needs Program for small businesses. That's all I got.
Does that conclude? Okay.
That does conclude. I apologize.
All right.
That concludes our presentation.
All right, thank you. Are there any, before I go to the public, are there any questions on this from any members of the board? No. Only question I have, I was wondering if we could just a little further explanation on the immediate timeline on both phases, perhaps phase 1s. I know the first one is for the loss of food, and then for the phase 1 on the business unmet needs, of approximate timeline when I feel like that might be able to get out.
So for the first phase of assistance, we're hoping that once we open that application center, that within that month period, we can start distributing and even complete distribution within that month. It might be a little bit longer, maybe 6 weeks, but that we're hoping to move very quickly on during that first phase, during the application. After that, phase 2 will be a little bit more variable. The case managers have a lot of capacity they've built up, but it is somewhat limited. So we're going to work to, as quickly as possible, get cases to them so they can move through them, and then continue as they free up capacity to move more cases to them, with our hope to get funding out, as soon as this. I mean, we're hoping to get funding out within even that first application window, but it will likely happen over, another 6 months to a year as cases are processed and then paid out in the phase 2.
And for the small businesses, we hopefully would like to, after 2 weeks, it's probably going to take us 2 weeks to go through the application process and review each of the grant applications. And once that's completed, then we'll be submitting the payments to the Auditor Controller's Office for them to pay. And hopefully we can get those out within 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any members in the public here that would like to speak on this matter? You would have 2 minutes. Go first to the folks in the room, then we'll go online.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I am Sister Rosa Dolores of Casa de la Cultura and chair of the Pájaro Alliance. I suspect that some of you at some point have experienced the sting of it being excluded or ignored. This past year, I have personally had that experience several times in such comments as, "You have not been invited to a public meeting." However, today, I am here as a chairperson of the Pájaro Disaster Long-Term Recovery. 4 points for your consideration in appointing and approving the proposal. 1, accountability, transparency, and monitoring from top to bottom. Especially keep the Pájaro residents informed of how these funds are being distributed. Feedback. 2, that residents' application and funding distribution take place in Pájaro and not use the residents as a ping pong victims, which has been happening. Pájaro, Watsonville, Watsonville, Pájaro. 3, that the funds be distributed in a more creative form rather than gift cards. Landlords are hesitant to accept cards for payment of rent. Give cash or check. 4, be aware and, if possible, think creatively regarding the terms duplication of funds and unmet needs. Many families received some kind of assistance throughout the early on. At present, most of them are not working, and so they are struggling with those unmet needs. These terms, as they are, will limit the time funding distribution. The focus of the Alliance has been to advocate for the betterment and empowerment of the community of Pájaro, to help develop leadership and engage the residents and businesses, to grow and help shift the balance of power. To have a great seat at the table, making decisions that affect them.
Thank you, Sister Rosa.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Eloise Shim. About 15 years ago, during the Great Recession/Depression, I needed rental assistance, and I applied to Catholic Charities, to Salvation Army, and some other rental helping places. They all denied my application, rendering me homeless for 10 years. Today, I was reveling in my subsidized apartment, and it dawned on me that for 10 years, all of my belongings were packed tightly into a storage space smaller than my closet. I'd shuffle some of my stuff out depending on where I was staying, and as my son says, "Mom, you've been homeless for 10 years." I hope that some of these charities distribute the granted monies equitably, and I hope that they've changed their practices, as $13 million is a lot of the taxpayers' money. We want those who need it to have their needs met, but we don't want bureaucrats to take advantage of a disastrous situation by mismanaging federal funds, FEMA. Diligent doesn't always mean inclusivity.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Leonardo Gonzalez, and I'm a resident of Pájaro, and I'm here to represent part of the community in Pájaro. There is so many problems regards this event or this catastrophe that happened back last year in March. It wasn't the only one, and early in the year, it happened in January. Anyways, FEMA didn't work professional. FEMA denied many of us to help. It worked as an insurance to pay the less or not paid at all for most of the residents. They didn't work as professional because they didn't make a good inspection to the homes and see the losses of most of our community residents. A lot of people are suffering from many ways. I'm asking to reconsider those $200 to $600 per family because that's ridiculous. I mean, there is so many losses that we cannot count. It's not just food, it's everything, everything that spoils, especially for people with allergies and stuff because of mold growing everywhere. They don't act professional. They never took good equipment to measure the moisture, to measure the damages as they were, the mold that it creates a lot of health problems for people, for children. The stress that it's been to this community, it's horrible. Most of the people in this community, it's a low-income people. And to make it throughout the month, it's really hard for most of us. I asked to reconsider and ask if you're going to give some money to give a check. We're going to work with you. We're going to make sure that things get well done, and then we learn from one catastrophe to the other. It's like we don't have experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Elba Carrillo.
Good afternoon. My name is Elba Carrillo.
La última vez que tuvimos la junta con Daniel y Vicente y Daisy, sus palabras fueron la ayuda equitativa para...
The last time we had the meeting with you, the words were about equitable help.
Que si FEMA había dado $1, iban a hacer como el resto y iban a dar el total.
That if FEMA was going to contribute $1, you would contribute a matching amount for the total.
Nosotros contamos 450 familias y quedaron de dar $12,500 para cada familia.
We counted 450 families, and each family was supposed to get $12,500 per family.
No entiendo por qué ahora quieren cambiar las cosas. Yo pienso que palabra es palabra.
I don't understand why you want to
Y
change
tenemos
things
que
because
acatar
word is
eso.
word, and we have to attack that.
Cuando se platicó eso con Vicente, se quedó dicho que las aplicaciones se llevarían a Casa de la Cultura.
When we talked to Vicente, it was agreed that applications were going to be taken at Casa de la Cultura.
Y que de ahí iba a ser elegible cada persona. También dijeron que iban a dar las aplicaciones a principios de febrero, hasta hoy día no las han dado.
They stated that each person was going to be eligible, as well as the applications were going to be handed out in February.
Nosotros estamos pidiendo que se lleve el dinero o las aplicaciones a la Casa de la Cultura.
We're asking that all monies and applications be sent over to Casa de la Cultura.
La Madre Dolores es la que ha peleado. Nosotros estamos a favor porque es la única que nos ha apoyado.
Mother
Nosotros
Dolores is the one that's been fighting, and she's been the only one that has supported us.
Que lleven el dinero ahí, lo queremos efectivo o cheque, no queremos tarjetas.
We're
Y no
asking for
queremos,
money in cash or check. We're not asking for money in credit cards.
no queremos que ahora nos den 200 para el mes que entra otros 200 porque no estamos haciendo ningún abono.
We're not asking for a monthly payment of $200 because we're not even giving an amount towards the end.
Yo como residente de Pájaro quiero que se respete a la Madre Dolores y no la hagan quedar como una tonta, porque ella ha sido la única representante de nosotros.
Myself as a Pájaro resident, I don't want Mother Dolores to be looked as a fool because she's representing us.
Ya va a ser un año que se inundó. Mis colchones ahora se están lamando.
It's going to be about a year since the flooding happened.
Mis
My
sillones se
mattresses
están
are turning
lamando.
into mold. My furniture is turning into mold.
Yo no quiero vivir todo el tiempo ese estrés.
I don't want to live constantly under that stress.
Si nos van a ayudar, ayúdenos, pero no nos estén dando limosnas.
If you're going to help us, but don't be giving us handouts.
Señor Alejo, yo tengo, hace poquito me enteré quién era su papá.
Mr. Alejo, just recently I found
Usted ha
out who your father
luchado
was.
por la comunidad. Entonces, ponga en honor lo que fue su papá.
You have fought for our
Levante su
community,
nombre
so
en lo
please
que fue
put
su
in
papá.
honor your father's name. Lift up your father's name.
Yo no sabía, pero hace tiempo, algunos días, me enteré que su papá era una gran persona y tenía palabra.
I just found out in a few
Póngale en
days
honor.
that your father was a great person and that he had a word. Please make honor to him.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Alejandra Muñoz.
Good afternoon, my name is Alejandra Muñoz.
Soy residente de la comunidad de Pájaro y vengo aquí para decirles que por favor reconsideren lo que han dicho de 200 a 600 familias. Es una, como dijo la señora, es una limosna.
I belong to the family, to the Pájaro community, and like the previous speaker said, what you're giving the Pájaro community is a handout.
Nosotros hemos sufrido mucho los estragos de toda esta inundación. Hemos visto cómo las familias sufren.
We've all been affected by this flooding. We've seen how all the families suffer.
En mi caso personal, la verdad, yo, Caridades Católicas, no ha hecho un buen trabajo en la comunidad.
In my personal view, Catholic Charities has not done a good job for the community.
Me trajeron vuelta y vuelta durante 2 meses para darme $50 para jabón.
They were giving me the runaround
ridículo.
for 2 months to give me $50 worth
No,
of laundry soap.
no
This is
podemos
ridiculous.
seguir con estas mismas clases de prácticas que hacen. Necesitamos cambiar todo.
We cannot follow the same kind of practices. We need to change everything.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the chambers?
Good afternoon. I'm Aida Melendres, Program Director for the Family Resource Collective of Community Bridges, as well as a Royal Oaks resident. I am thankful for the recommendation you have provided to have us distribute the funds for the unmet needs. We have distributed over $1.7 million to the community, and we will continue to be transparent in the process of the amounts distributing as such. We also, excuse me, we will also ensure to follow all the set priorities and the process that the county sets. And it's a pleasure to continue to work with the Pájaro community in our Pájaro location as well. So thank you so much for the recommendations.
Hi, my name is Alfonso Moran, president of the business group in Pájaro. And I just have a few questions, but before we get started, thank you for your time. Thank you, Chris and Laura, for the presentation. We have a few questions. Well, I have a question. There was some information that was given in the presentation that there would be some revision of documentation. Some of the business's concerns are that they lost the documentation during the flood. So just hopefully we could get some information on how would those business be able to approve. Second of all, there was March 10 to March 31st as a revision. That's what I kind of understood. Some of the business did open after that date. So, and some didn't. Some opened, like myself, we opened around April, mid-April. Some opened till May. So hopefully those dates could be taken into consideration as far as loss of income. And also, we hope to have some on-the-field assistance for the applications. Some people did have some issues with the whole online process. So if we could have some someone to help all those people out in person. That would be very helpful. And we do hope that all those funds are distributed ASAP, because there's a lot of businesses struggling out there as far as residents. So all in all, we hope that we get this money out to the businesses and residents as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Is there anybody else in the chambers that would like to speak on this item? Do we have anybody online? Yes.
There is one hand raised, now two, and the first attendee is Brian Bond.
Yes, you have 2 minutes.
And actually, excuse me, Ricardo Diaz.
Ron, you have 2 minutes.
I'm sorry, that's a raised hand by accident.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Ricardo Diaz.
Mr. Diaz, your 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Ricardo Diaz, trustee, North Monterey County Unified. You know, I've been following this from the start, obviously, and I just wanted to say the people, you know, are speaking to you guys. They're letting their mind know their concerns known to you all the time, and I just think they should be treated better, like equal to, like, say, other people. If maybe, for instance, this was you know, people from the agricultural community, like the farmers, the owners, the millionaires, you guys would be over there faster, giving out thousands, you know, taking pictures. You know, they're the people that can give money to your guys' campaigns. I just think that these people need to be treated, you know, like equal to everyone else. You know, with real money, real checks, and not just, you know, be kind of jerked around a little. But respectfully, I just hope that you guys do the right thing and help the people of Pajaro the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online?
Yes, Casa de la Cultura.
Yes, you have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes there, but you may speak from the Casa de Cultura line.
Their microphone is up, but they're not talking.
Okay. Is there anybody else?
Yes, Samsung SMA125U.
Yes, Samson, you have 2 minutes.
They're not unmuting their mic.
Is there anybody else we can go to, maybe come back?
Casa unmuted their mic, so maybe they're ready.
All right. Yes, you have 2 minutes. Please go. All right. And is there anybody else available?
One more, Angelica de Nueva.
Angelica de Nueva, you have 2 minutes, or 4 minutes if you need Spanish interpretation. Please go.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Mi nombre es Alejandra.
My name is Alejandra.
Yes, we can hear you.
En la otra community meeting, en la casa de la cocina, que tiene un sitio de aquí de dirigente, que nos daría también equitativa como la que dimos en un meeting. En la primera junta que tuvimos, cuando nos avisaron, cuando nos dieron entender que tenemos 20 millones de...
Could you please not use a speakerphone if you're on a speaker? Yes, please go. Please don't use a speaker, or interpreter can't hear.
Orden usar la bocina del teléfono celular.
5 millones por 450 familias, que serían 12.500 por cada familia. Ok, hasta ahorita ustedes están viendo las expectativas y las palabras que vienen a mí, de que vine. Si yo tengo una necesidad de 5 millones, okay.
I'm sorry, we're unable to really translate. The audio is very poor.
Por familia nos tocarían 11.778.
Okay. Diego, can you hear anything at all that you'd be able to?
All I heard was 12,500 for family based on 450 families.
Por lo que me dijeron darnos que no dar, honestamente les pregunto, ¿ustedes sobrevivirían después de un desastre con un desastre de 400 o 500 dólares? No puedo tomar esto. Yo, en lo personal como presidente, comparto la tristeza y el mal tomar de esta respuesta de ustedes, de muchos representantes que yo tengo aquí en la sala de la Casa de Juntas, de la Casa de la Cultura, que siento que no están haciendo lo correcto con nosotros. Efectivamente, no queremos una...
She's basically saying that she's at the Casa Cultura with a bunch of families in presence, and they're not in agreement with the way that they're being treated.
Por el manejo del dinero de los 10 millones, o sea que ni siquiera nos van a entregar 10 millones completos, nos van a quitar 900,000 por el manejo de esos 10 millones.
The full amount is not given to each family.
También decidió el condado que fuera para mejoras del pájaro, que está bien, pero eso deberían de haberlo hecho mucho antes de que fuera el desastre. Yo les pido a nombre de muchos presidentes que están aquí conmigo que sobrevaloren, en verdad, y tomen en cuenta por todo lo que hemos pasado. Voy a volver a recordarles que aquí en el pájaro ha habido 2 suicidios. No queremos más pérdidas humanas, porque la gente tiene...
She's basically saying that people are suffering and having patience for funds.
Vuelvan a rectificar sus cuentas, porque creo que nadie estamos ni decididos ni preparados para recibir, así sea en efectivo, 600, ni 400, ni 500, ni 1,000 dólares, cuando al principio pedimos 5 millones para que nos dieran 12,000 y tantos. Ok, no hay, entonces nos toca por la cantidad que tenemos, 11,778. Pienso que ningún presidente estamos a la espera de tirar la mano para que nos den una limosna. Por favor,
Thank you. Diego, can you...
What I was able to hear is basically that you need to review your numbers again and not be handing out checks for $600 or $1,200, but to redo the numbers again and come up with a figure that's more acceptable to the community at Casa de Cultura. That's all I got.
Thank you very much for your attempts there. Who else is on?
Is this Samsung? Oh, yeah.
Yes, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Is it Spanish?
Samsung line, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
His
Okay.
mic is muted.
Let's see. Is there anybody else on here?
Yes, Angela D. Novella.
Angela, you have 2 minutes. Will you please, you may begin?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Angela Di Novella, and I'm the Executive Director of Catholic Charities here at the Diocese of Monterey. And I am excited to be part of this work and working in the community for all these years, but particularly working in the past year with the community of Pájaro, specifically on the disaster recovery. We have been working with the families throughout our disaster case management, and we're again happy and excited to be continuing to do this work in partnership with Community Bridges and the County of Monterey, and continue our work to be transparent and open to working side by side with the agencies that are on the ground and also with the people that needed our support. So again, thank you for the partnership and the work that we have accomplished together and continue to do moving forward in the future as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
We still have some Sansum, SM, and Casa de la Cultura again.
Well, we can't go back to Casa de Cultura. They already spoke. But we do have Samsung. I'll give you one more chance here. If you're on line, you would like to speak, you have 2 minutes. Do we have anybody else? Okay. I'm going to want to see if there's anybody in the chamber still that would like to address this matter before we close public comment. Okay. We'll close public comment and bring this back to the board. And board members here have any comments or questions they would like to raise at this point? Yes, Supervisor Alejo.
Thank you very much. I think first of all, thank the residents of Pajaro and the business leaders who came and that have been involved in this process. I know my colleague Supervisor Church is taking the lead to numerous town halls in Pajaro. That's very much appreciated, and I think staff has engaged with numerous one-on-one meetings with some stakeholders as well. So I want to thank our staff for bringing this forward and our nonprofit partners. No good deed goes unpunished, is the saying sometimes, you know, but we in the County of Monterey are professionals. We do this work not to get thanks, but to deliver the best service that we can to the people that are in need. That's our mission, right? And I want to thank our governor, and I want to thank our state legislators that provided these $20 million. I don't think in any other flood have they given $20 million to any community. Planada in Merced County and Pajaro were the first disadvantaged communities to get flood assistance after this type of disaster, and we're thankful for that. But with that, our obligations to the state, their contracts, there's checks and balances, there's potential audits that happen. As a former state legislator, myself, former assembly member, I know that the state can easily down the road ask for an audit, and we have to show the state, the legislature, the governor, the public, more importantly, that we delivered these $20 million to Pajaro in the right way. So there has to be checks here, and I think what our staff presented is a good plan. Yes, I understand that sometimes other groups want to have control of the funds, but just because you didn't get it doesn't mean you got hurt. You didn't get hurt. But the county has a responsibility to carry this out in the best way we think possible. And I want to acknowledge Community Bridges and Catholic Charities. I know some of our public members spoke to them today, but when there was a lot of hurt in Pajaro, a lot of disaster, these are some of our nonprofit partners that stepped up, not only utilizing government resources, but also raising private dollars to help out Pajaro. And I'm grateful for that, and I want to acknowledge that leadership and that work, because it's not easy all the time. You do it because you're dedicated to community. You want to help the families in need, homeowners, business owners, and sometimes the criticism comes with this line of work, as I've learned in my 16 years in politics. And I just wanted to be clear, all right, on the amounts, because some of the public comments were saying it's a gift card, $600. No, it's not. The presentation was very clear. And it's on these slides that were put up here. This is available, hopefully, online for the public. But on individual and household assistance, as you rightly pointed out, it's the $600 gift card. That's only for the food, right? But there's the home repair category, the vehicle repair or replacement. As we know, a lot of vehicles got completely damaged or partially damaged, the housing assistance, the personal assistance. And that slide says, in those categories, 5 categories, personal property and housing assistance has a combined maximum of $15,000 per residential household. I just want to be clear on what the numbers are, because they're not significant. This is more than what FEMA provided. This is more than what the state provided in the new storm assistance for immigrants that our board advocated for, the first of its kind storm assistance program for undocumented immigrants, families that didn't qualify for FEMA. That was a new program the state created on top of this money they gave us. So this is significant. This is more than, I think we gave a $750 program additional from the county. It was a smaller amount because that's what we had available. This is outside of that as well. Now, on the small business side, this is a big component of the $20 million because FEMA and all the federal assistance, when they came to Pajaro, if you were a small business owner and you had lost products, goods, your store was damaged, you only, I think the SBA only offered a low interest loan primarily, maybe some technical assistance, but there wasn't much there. On this chart that you just finished explaining to us, there's a storefront maximum, 85,000 maximum. That's much more than what was available through the federal and state programs. And as we got a smaller category. If somebody was working from home, had a small business, now $5,000 maximum. So for me, these are significant amounts of money. And we want those who are eligible for it to get it, right? Everything's gonna be transparent. At the end of all the application period, we're gonna be able to know how much did we deliver, how much people got into people's hands or small business hands. We're gonna give a report to the public on it. But I do want to let the public know that originally when staff came to this board, I think the total amount recommended for individual and business assistance was $6 million. This board said we're going to increase it to $10 million. Half the money is going to go to individual and small business assistance. The other $10 million is going to go to improvements in the community of Pajaro in other ways as well. So I just want to be clear on some of the things that get repeated here that are not accurate based on the plan that you're laying out. And I want the community to know that these are significant. They're more than what FEMA gave them, more than what the Storm Assistance for Immigrants, the California State Program provided. It's more than the county small program that we gave out. So I want to commend these efforts, and I want to make sure that we do it right. You know, yes, we wish we could have got it out sooner. Government does move slow. This came to the state budget last summer. Then it takes a while to get the money from the state to enter the agreements to make sure that we're not duplicating programs. We have to follow all the requirements in the budget bill, the state law that provided the money. We have to follow all those requirements. So it does take time and to get contractual agreements, but we're here now. And I'm glad that you're going to go to Pajaro Park to help people enroll into the program, answer questions. I know you're going to get a big crowd out there. You might also get some frustrated residents as well. We understand that, but county staff, we're professionals. We're going to give the best delivery of service possible to our families and the small businesses, despite whatever criticism we know we might hear, but we're going to deliver this and do this program right. So I want to commend our staff. We have a mission ahead of us to deliver on this, and I know we're going to do the best job possible for it. The only other comment I wanted to say is that many of us did roll up our sleeves and stepped up and to help out in a lot of different ways. I just want to say, please don't bring up my deceased father. You know, my father was an activist in the community, but just to make a point, you don't have to bring up somebody's deceased family just to make a political point in these meetings. So I would appreciate that. I do work not because to lift up my father's name. It's something, values that we were instilled with, and I do them every single week in public office, and even as a young attorney for my clients and constituents. So I just want to say we could have a civil conversation and just be respectful of our families as well in this process. But I want to commend the community input because we do have a better plan. We are going to deliver a better program because of the input that we have received. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I just would want to emphasize as well, too, that this is much more than the $2,600 that I've heard around a number somewhere around $6-7 million that has been put into the community through FEMA, state, through the county's program previously. This is basically another $10 million here just on the unmet needs, another $10 million going in for infrastructure. This hasn't been done, as Supervisor Alejo referred to, especially not into this county to this kind of degree. And it is going to be a transparent process because the state really demands it. This is money that came down from the state. It's not money that we had in complete control within this county. I do know there was some concern raised about documentation, and I think there's some valid concerns that has been raised here about maybe receipts that would have been lost during the flood for people or pictures that have been lost proving something. And wanted to see if staff is anyway perhaps can respond to that a little bit on the flexibility that we might be able to have for those unusual circumstances.
Yeah, of course. And I actually really appreciate that comment. One of the things that we're most proud about this program is how flexible we actually are able to create this process. Yes, there is somewhat of a stringent application process up front, which is, in my opinion, equitable across the application period. But most importantly, the community of Pajaro they're not just numbers, they're people and their faces and their names and their experiences. And they have experienced a federal cost recovery process that removes that humanity and dignity. And one of our priorities was to focus on bringing back dignity to government services in an equitable way that could be applied to all families. And so our promise is to hear the stories. It's to hear and understand what the needs are beyond what the federal and state government have been able to provide, and put a face to that story so that the money can be leveraged and utilized effectively to support the actual family based on what they need. And so we have created a process by which the disaster case managers present the information to a review panel. We hear the story, we hear the experience, we hear justification for why documentation might have been lost or missed, and collectively in an equitable and well-rounded panel address that concern and look beyond just the black and white of the rules. And so through that process, we're hoping to, as all of the community members have pointed out, create a program that actually serves the community based on what their need, not our perception of their need.
Thank you. Yes, Supervisor Lopez.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff. I know this isn't easy as was set up here. We're under a time frame as well. I know nobody's mentioned that yet, but it's a major concern for me, making sure we get these dollars into the community in a way that's going to have impact. As we sit here today looking at the proposal, hearing this last conversation, the important piece to me is that you hear from this board, and I'm hoping it's unanimous in this sense, that we want you to use as much flexibility as possible in terms of that documentation is allowable by law. Obviously, we don't want it to come back in the end in an audit to say the county owes for not having the documentation to back this up. But to that extent, as far as you can make sure that this community gets taken care of, I think we can all agree that that's our desire, that's our direction. I hear that you're where it's coming from, and I hear that that's part of the mission and the core of this objective for you and your team. But for us, I want you to know, at least on my behalf and what I'm hearing from my colleagues, is we support that and we want to see that carried out. We're sitting here today with 4 members on this dais. It's going to take all 4 of us to vote for this in order to make it go. And so given the conversations we have, the timeline it takes to get before us each time to bring iterations and versions and drafts, I think we're ready. I think it's time to pull the trigger, get this into the community, and start helping folks. Nobody's going to trust it until it starts. And I get that, especially having right now representing communities that are not in this position, as I shared last time. They've got no dollars coming to them. And I've still got folks who got flooded out 3 to 4 years ago in Chular who are still wondering, are we ever going to see recovery? And we know they're not. And it's a tough, tough place. But what we're talking about today is putting real dollars into the community in real forms. Yes, there's a question of cards, but the majority here we are talking about cash, right, in one form at the end of the day for those major losses like vehicles and repairs. And so for me, I appreciate the work that's gone into this. We will never find perfection. We could talk about this for another 4 to 5 years to talk about what it should look like. But at the end of the day, we need to get these dollars into the community to allow them to start feeling that recovery within their homes, to get rid of that mold and move forward. So for those reasons, I'm prepared to support this today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Askew.
I'll largely echo many of my colleagues' comments, but I do want to just take a minute and acknowledge the community members who have, for the past year, after having undergone tremendous trauma and upset and loss in your own lives, that you've had to spend the next year advocating and fighting for the resources that you need to rebuild. So I see you, and we acknowledge how, I can only imagine how hard this must be for you to have to continue showing up and asking for what you need. But it's because of your voices and it's because of your advocacy that we were able to secure these particular dollars that we're talking about today. Had you not been as vocal and organized as you have been, I don't think we would have received these state dollars. So I want to give you credit and thank you for the work that you've done. In terms of the feedback that we've heard about changes to this program, my commitment is to get these dollars out into the community as quickly as possible. I think when we initially heard the presentation with some staff recommendations, we were able to make changes quickly in response to community feedback. And we could continue iterating, but again, getting these dollars out to community members who need them most right now, I think is what our task is. So I'm prepared to support this today. I want to thank our county team who also are navigating effectively uncharted waters. This isn't something that we've done before. This isn't a program that we've rolled out before, and you really are creating the roadmap that we're following as you're navigating it. So thank you for your commitment to continuing to learn and grow and iterate changes as needed in lifetime. And I guess the last thing just for this board, and I know we've talked about this and I've talked about this, I think part of the reason why part of our commitment and the need that we have on an ongoing basis is to figure out how we can continue to act on the values of equity that we talk about and make sure that not just when we have general fund dollars or road fund dollars, but in every single program that we have funding available, whether it's CSBG, CDBG, other investments, that we're really intentionally putting those dollars into the communities that have historically not been able to self-fund or generate those monies directly. I think that's incumbent on this board. And the way that you all can help us is by continuing to bring forward the issues and concerns that you have so that we can make sure that in every space that we're making decisions, your issues and your needs are at the forefront of everyone's mind. So I think our work continues, but I'll pass it back to the chair to make a motion, given this is your district. And I'm happy to support this today.
Mr. Chair, just to do one more point, just to add on what Supervisor asked you, I agree. And it's a timely comment because there's a lot of other disadvantaged communities, some that didn't get this help. I remember seeing the photos of those houses in, I think, San Ardo that were flooded. Chular, you were out there with the tractor, supervisor, helping. That was in the January, I think the January storms that didn't get this kind of help that also suffered these losses. But last night, Supervisor Lopez was out there in some of the first street lights in San Lucas, and last year their first sidewalks and their first streets, other poor disadvantaged communities. And so I agree. We should be making these intentional investments in disadvantaged communities to give them some of the basic infrastructure that they've been waiting for a very long time. So I agree. So I hope we do act on that. I know the dollars are more scarce, but we got to do more of what we did in San Lucas. The only other thing I would point out that the checks are important because my staff Javier volunteered for 2 months straight from March to mid-May at the fairground shelter. Many of us were out there many days. I wasn't there for 2 months straight, but I was there a lot. And there were folks, it happens when these disasters happen and when there's resources deployed to certain areas that there were non-flood impacted residents, to put it nicely, that showed up. So our staff had to kind of filter through to make sure that those who actually needed it and were Pajaro residents or the flood areas on the Santa Cruz County side actually got the resources. That's our job, to ensure that the resources are going to those who really deserve it. So that's why the checks and balances our part. It was our reality at the fairgrounds with the resources that were there, and it's going to be our reality to make sure that the people who this was intended for are going to get those dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what Supervisor Askew said about community engagement. I do think the way the community came together on this and became organized played a big role in terms of this, of the attention that came down through the state and getting this up so that this money would be brought into here. Having been at multiple meetings out there in town halls, the one thing that struck out to me is just how overwhelming a presence the community had. Usually when you have meetings like this and you have 150 people turn out for the first one, it dwindles down. This didn't dwindle down. It kept up or increased. And I think that was just phenomenal. I didn't see that turn out anywhere else on any other event I've ever experienced in this county. And I think that really speaks to what's happened here. The residents formed, the business community formed, and there's a brighter future ahead onto this at this point because of that. This isn't going to be perfect because we don't have a template. We don't have, we haven't done this before. So there are going to be things that need to be improved, and hopefully as we go along with this, we can tweak it and make it a little bit better. But time is of an essence, and unless there's any other comments here the board have, I would make a motion to approve this point, and second by Supervisor Alejo. With no other discussion, we can put this to a vote then. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I'm sorry, public comment closed. There was plenty of opportunity earlier. I can't reopen it. So we have passed on to this. We'll go to item number 29, which is the receiver presentation from the Department of Emergency Management regarding the 2023 Department of Emergency Management Annual Report and 2024 Department of Emergency Management Priorities.
I do. All right, without further ado, I'd like to talk about your emergency management program. This was our first year as a standalone department within the Monterey County Department, or County of Monterey. We were previously a division of the County Administrator's Office, and this governing body identified the increase in community services, or the need for community services in relation to disasters and emergencies, and have over the past 5 years aggressively invested in our program. And so my hope with this presentation is to show you that throughput of what you've invested in, how we've leveraged those resources and the impact it's had on the community, and where we're going for the next 365 days. I had originally hoped to present this in, January or late December, but alas, we were somewhat delayed. I won't belinger too much of our accomplishments from last year, but we did have two back-to-back federal disasters, which the last time this did occur was in 1995. And so over the course of the year, we sent out 195 emergency notifications. A vast majority of those did occur in the January through March period. And then, as you'll remember, at the end of the calendar year, we did quite significant amounts of testing of the new emergency alert system. Over the course of that year, the Monterey County DEM duty officer, which is a position staffed 24/7, did respond or receive notification through our public safety partners of 37 potential threats and or hazards that required DEM support. So not full disasters or emergencies, but an increase in day-to-day services. I would also like to note that our local proclamation for the COVID-19 pandemic did expire this past spring. And in the report, I really wanted to highlight the significance of what our communities have faced over the last 3 years in response to that global health crisis, and thank them greatly for their engagement with the county. I think that's the most community engagement I've seen collectively and consistently over several years. And as a result, we were able to provide very useful services between public information dissemination, alternate housing sites, alternate care sites, testing sites, commodity distribution, of the funeral burial assistance program for over 2 years. In addition to our response to two federal disasters, as I mentioned before, we began testing and rolling out our new alert and warning system. We did develop the equity officer position within the Emergency Operations Center and was staffed by 3 to 5 people in both the January and March storms to ensure that disaster services were meeting the full need of the community, not just the majority. And then we also started evaluating and rolling out a revamped disaster service worker program, which I presented to you in this past January, and our intention to increase disaster service worker training and capacity so that we could have a greater breadth of response from our disaster service workers. And then in addition to that, we did a full post-disaster logistics inventory, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Would really like to highlight that the equity officer was able to resource and mobilize over 20 interpreters throughout both emergencies and throughout our community engagement in the recovery process, utilizing 6 different languages and 2,000 door-to-door engagements. In 2023, we had one of our most significant legislative years in terms of activities and items brought to this board for approval. A good portion of those were grant management and administration. Our capacity to manage and administer grants has greatly and vastly increased, which has allowed us to act as a pass-through for federal and state dollars that we were unable to do before. And then, of course, 32% of our legislative items were directly related to our response operations. Our financial portfolio did expand. As I had mentioned, we, this past year, have managed a $25 million multi-year grant program, totaling 15 grants, and those greatly increased over the past year, which means direct resources into the community for disaster preparedness, resilience, response, and recovery. This does not include recovery dollars through the public assistance grant program. But we really focused on that transition from a division of the CAO to a standalone department, creating that fiscal and administration control that we were previously receiving from the county administrator's office. We increased our ability to provide duty officer services with on-call compensation, and increased our ability to actually perform grant administration by adding a finance manager and a grant analyst. And then in addition to that, was able to increase our ability to process disaster cost recovery and maximize that reimbursement. I presented this at the legislative workshop, and I just wanted to bring it forward again. Prior to having a finance manager, we were unable to provide a snapshot of what the county had experienced in terms of expenses, department, or with all of the departments included, not just our own. This does not include the 2017 storms, which were expended prior to the grants portal, so I believe the CAO's office is still working to get a clear snapshot on expenses from 2017, and it does not also include this past February. But I think most notably, this is a slow process. We are very much still actively pursuing the grant public assistance grant program reimbursement. We've expended over $125 million, and only $88 million of that has been identified as possible reimbursement, and $4 million of that $88 million has been obligated, meaning we have shown the documentation and FEMA has agreed. So this is a slow process. It takes a lot of time, and I don't want to get anybody's hopes up that we'll see a lot of money anytime soon. And prior to this, we did not have the full administrative and financial capability to aggressively go after reimbursement. And so I'm happy that we're here today talking about what it is that we can now bring to the table, that we are a standalone department. From management and administration, as I had mentioned, we have really been focusing on that transition of a division that was really reflective of somewhat of a bygone era within the emergency management industry that came out of, civil defense and the Cold War and World War I and II, and really made it what the community actually needs and what it's reflective of, which is unique needs. It's somewhat of a bespoke experience. Every single person experiences a disaster differently, and it impacts them differently. And we understand that to the best degree possible. And we wanted our emergency management agency to be reflective of that ever-changing need, especially with climate change and a global health crisis, really highlighting the disparities amongst our communities. And so with that, we did work with the County Administrator's Office Communication Division to create a new brand. We disseminated a lot of public information. We created several new positions and classifications and allocated those positions to increase our overall capacity to serve. We brought on so many new employees, and I'm actually very excited. They're here in chambers today. If you could all raise your hands. You might not recognize a vast majority of these faces. They're brand new to the county or brand new to the department, and they're excited to serve. They're hungry for that opportunity to create disaster services that the community really needs. And then I did want to celebrate Bonnie, our finance manager this year. She celebrated 25 years with the county, and we want to commend her for that commitment. And then most notably with that, we reorganized. We wanted our organization structured to reflect a nimble group of people who are able to provide services that can flex and accommodate an increase in disaster services. And so what you'll see here on the far left side of the organization chart is our ability for continuity of operations regardless of disaster. And then making our way towards those middle columns, really looking at the intersection or nexus between preparedness and response, and that nexus between recovery and mitigation, fully rounding out our ability to respond to all phases of an emergency. And so with that, we're looking into 2024 and our priorities for this year. We did consult with the County Administrative Office as to what this could look like. And so most notably from 2023 to 2024, as we're moving out of response and towards the end of that immediate recovery and looking at long-term resilient solutions in our disaster-impacted communities across the Monterey County operational area, and looking at how, as a new department, we can realign with our 2023-2025 strategic plan in preparation for that update. So from in rank of priority, of course, Pajaro long-term recovery is our #1 item, with the update of the 2025 Emergency Operations Plan as our second, our alert and warning program, a new website, our disaster service worker program, logistics capability and capacity development, community organizations active in disasters, community emergency response teams, youth preparedness programs, and cost recovery and grant administration. I liked the wow, thank you. We have really touched upon this. I was hoping that this presentation was going first, but short of the long is that we've focused on the immediate recovery needs, and now we're going to start looking at that long-term recovery and what that plan looks like and where we can start implementing the AB 102 funds beyond just the unmet needs. The Emergency Operations Plan is at the top of our list in that it is the document that governs our department and the county-wide disaster response capabilities, and ultimately is the document that reflects what it is that the county is willing to invest in our ability to respond to emergencies and recover. Since the last iteration, since the last iteration, at least 7 new legislative items have been presented, which are unfunded mandates. And so we will be seeking an RFP for a consultant to update the plan and manage the community engagement efforts and conduct a 1-year planning effort, which will go through our disaster council for support and then back to the board for ratification. As a kind of an EOP 101, as I had mentioned, each jurisdiction is responsible for ensuring that actions are taken to protect people and property from any threat or hazard. The EOP describes what the local government will do when conducting emergency operations and addresses the various response functions and ultimately who is going to do what. The new legislation is very exciting because it's very much in alignment with what we've already been doing, which is focusing on community resilience, focusing on equity, focusing on access and functional needs, cultural competence, and really that community-led engagement. And so we'll be working with that consultant to ensure that the new legislation is satisfied throughout the planning process, and in addition to that, in the content of the actual plan. And then we'll go through the new plan submission and review process with Cal OES, which had not been previously done before or required by Cal OES. The first iteration, as I had mentioned, was completed in 2007 and then was updated subsequently in 2014 and 2020, all of which were ratified by the Board of Supervisors. It generally takes about a year to update, sometimes a bit longer if you don't have the support or resources. It is a very lengthy document that requires significant analysis about capability and ability to respond. And so with these newly unfunded mandates, we're hoping that the board can, in the recommendations, support funding a consultant to assist us in updating the plan and conducting that community engagement. Our alert and warning system is one of our greatest public safety responsibilities. As the alerting authority, we have the duty to disseminate emergency alerts to protect life and property. Over the past year, we have been testing a new alert and warning system and are looking to fully migrate to the new system this spring. And that includes a new mapping component previously known as Zone Haven, but has been procured by Genesis. And so upon decommissioning the previous system, we'll conduct a public information campaign, including a Know Your Zone campaign. The new website, this is actually exciting because it already happened. I'm not sure if you guys noticed it this past storm. In the middle of it, we launched our brand new response and recovery and preparedness website at www.readymontereycounty.org. We have been working on this for just about 6 months with Nick Pasculi and ITD to develop the standalone website that is countywide and not Monterey County government specific, and it really does serve the incorporated jurisdictions as well as the unincorporated area for providing Monterey County specific preparedness, response, and recovery information. So yay, accomplishment in February of 2024. And then our disaster service worker program, which I also presented last month. I'm very excited about this, and with your direction, we are getting ready to roll out all of the training and registration this month. Logistics. So we have found that with approximately 7 federal disasters in 7 years, we've gathered in somewhat of a hoarding kind of way a lot of resources and kind of just put them in other people's space, other departments' space. In this past winter, we saw collectively how much we had actually gathered, which is about 6,000 cubic feet of disaster supplies. And you're like, wow, I can't imagine that. See this picture? It's about 6 rows of this and the full length of the records retention warehouse. It is a lot of disaster supplies, and we've been taking up a lot of space without really any true capacity to manage the inventory. We had no idea what we actually had. We didn't know where it was. We didn't know how to access it, how to mobilize it. And so this next year, we'll be really focusing on evaluating and making recommendations for how we can mobilize and manage our vast quantity of disaster supplies that we have procured over the past 7 years. Really looking at investing in the community, not just in government capacity. We've been looking at the last 5 years about how government can serve. Now we're looking beyond what just government can do. How can we reinforce and create a force multiplier within the community that is trusted by the community? And so we are looking at developing a community organizations active in disasters, a COAD. We saw the value of our nonprofit communities this past winter. We saw how passionate they were for the community. We saw how many resources they could bring to the table. We saw the unbridled joy of serving in a disaster beyond just disaster service workers. And we really want to harness that passion so that we're maximizing local resources and not duplicating efforts or missing whole community needs in large gaps. And so we are working with Monterey County Foundation, who are hiring a COAD manager and working to develop a COAD program, including policies and procedures, and what that interface and nexus into government disaster services looks like, how we can work together in an emergency, in the emergency operations center, so that we're sharing resources appropriately that are both culturally appropriate as well as response appropriate. I'm almost done, I promise. The community emergency response teams. This, again, is actually already occurring. We have very much a grassroots level cultural paradigm shift in our communities that have experienced disasters. They want to serve. They want to participate in their own rescue, which is so exciting. And so we want to take that energy and focus it on creating more community emergency response teams in our highly vulnerable communities. And how can we resource them? How can we train them? How can we teach a man to fish? Essentially is what we're talking about, and how can we increase that partnership in responding to a disaster. Youth preparedness, it starts with the kids, right? If they're talking about it at school, they're talking about it at home, and if they're talking about it at home, the parents are aware. And that means we have a whole community preparedness. We have increased resilience at the family household level that we have been unable to do before. And so we've been engaging with Monterey County Office of Education to identify schools in our pilot program, Monterey County Cares for Kids. And this will be directly into the classroom teaching preparedness, utilizing FEMA's Ready Kids curriculum that have been established nationwide. And then cost recovery, I've already talked about this a little bit, but we really want to start looking at how collectively as a county we can maximize recovery dollars, and how can we do it in such a way that looks at our current decentralized process of each individual department, submitting the response costs to FEMA and then slowly getting the monies back. How can we do this more efficiently and effectively to ensure that we're meeting documentation requirements, we're actually conducting eligible activities, and that the money is making its way back to the county? And so with that, congratulations, you accomplished the first recommendation, which is to receive a presentation from us regarding our 2023 accomplishments and our 2024 priorities, and then authorizing and direct the auditor controller to amend our fiscal 2023-2024 budget to increase appropriations by $50,000 funded by unspent ARPA revenues to contracted services to update the Monterey County EOP, direct the county administrative office in fiscal year 2024-2025 to set aside $125,000 in ARPA funds, unspent ARPA funds, to continue with contracted services to update the Monterey County EOP, and authorize and direct the auditor, controller, and county administrative office to incorporate these changes in fiscal year 23-24 DEM budget.
That's the presentation?
That is the presentation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board before I take out to the public?
No, Ms. Scanlon, I just want to thank Director Scanlon. I just want to thank you and your team for your really amazing work elevating your office, your department, and even the work in the schools preparing the younger generations of emergency preparedness. It's becoming more important than ever. So for all those staff, thank you, because we've learned, at least in all my years in government, that your work, your department is probably one of the most important, as we know that these emergencies are becoming more frequent. And when people are stressed out and they're evacuating their homes, communities are being evacuated, it's all that information you give before, during, and after that really makes a profound difference. So I just love seeing the work just be taken to another level. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your really good team and bilingual staff that has now been added. Wasn't always there in that department, and but it's needed more than ever in the diverse county that we have. So I do want to salute you for your tremendous work.
If there are comments, I'll take it out to the public and then come back to the board. Is there anybody in the chambers has a comment? Anybody online? No. Okay, come back here to the board. Supervisor, ask you, did you have something?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I just, in addition to everything that you have on your list, and the scoping for 2024 and beyond is significant, I want to acknowledge the FEMA reimbursement piece, which is huge. When we talk about managing our finances and taking advantage of, we've been really lucky that Monterey County has had strong financial controls and had a strategic revenue
strategic reserve that has allowed us to respond to the crises that have come up. But the expectation when we approve, large expenditures in times of crisis is always that, there'll be FEMA reimbursement behind that. And I know that FEMA reimbursement has been slow, but it's slow and it requires someone to manage it according to all of these federal bureaucratic systems. So I want to really say thank you for getting your arms around that. We're oftentimes looking at where our general fund dollars are coming from, but we've got millions of dollars sitting out there potentially to recover or not recover based on the work that you and your team are doing. So significant, it's meaningful, it's going to allow us to do the other work that the county needs to do. I also want to say thank you to you and your team for hosting regular educational outreach events. It's been really great to be able to bring our local elected officials into the office, into the operations center, and show them sort of what happens in these times of crisis, where everyone gathers, how a chain of command works. So doing that work when we're not in an active crisis, I think is going to allow us to be so much better prepared to work effectively and collaboratively when everyone is under tremendous stress. So I want to say thank you for that. It wasn't officially on your list, but we look forward to continuing to get all of our local electeds out to see the Emergency Operations Center and get access to training so that they understand their role and their appropriate role and how they can work with their local jurisdiction to make sure that they're prepared as well. So thank you for everything you're doing. I just wanted to highlight those additional things that are above and on top of what you had listed on your to-do list.
Thank you. I also think it's important to acknowledge the County Administrative Office. She and her team have really started digging into the FEMA public assistance process. Ezekiel has so many questions, but it takes a village. This is not an easy process, so I wanted to acknowledge them as well.
Move approval.
All right. All right. Motion approved by Supervisor Lopez. A second by Supervisor Askew. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Opposed? Thank you very much for your
And
presentation.
thank you to the new DEM team.
Yes, and thank you very much. DM is something kind of an unusual department. We don't hear from you, and we know everything is going really well, but when we have a problem, we really need you. So now we can move to back to item 28, which is to consider an adoption of the ordinance amending Title 21 of the Monterey County Code to adopt a new Chapter 2192 for mitigation requirements for development on farmland in the inland areas of unincorporated Monterey County.
Thank you, Chair, Board. Melanie Beretti with County Housing and Community Development. We're happy to be here today to present the Farmland Mitigation Ordinance that's been under development for the last 2 years, and then some for the county. And I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Taylor Price, who's going to share with the clerk, who will distribute his printed presentation for you.
Good afternoon, Board and Chair Church. My name is Taylor Price, Associate Planner, joined by Melanie Beretti, Acting Chief of Planning. Today we will be presenting the proposed Farmland Mitigation Ordinance, also known as Chapter 21.92, Regulations to Mitigate for Development on Farmland. This presentation will review the background for the ordinance's development, outreach conducted, hearing body process, Planning Commission recommendations, and staff's responses, and the key elements of the proposed ordinance. We have prepared slides that walk through the ordinance. Staff would like to ask the chair if they would agree to allow staff to finish all of the slides before taking questions or comments from the board or members of the public. Thank you. Staff requests today that the Board of Supervisors adopt regulations amending Title 21 to add Chapter 21.92, Regulations to Mitigate for Development on Farmland. Staff would like to review the policy framework for the draft ordinance briefly. The 2010 General Plan directs the county to preserve, protect, and enhance farmland in order to maintain the productivity and viability of the county's agricultural industry, while encouraging growth in or near developed or developing areas and away from valuable farmland. The agricultural element that is a part of the 2010 General Plan directs the county to promote the long-term protection, conservation, and enhancement of productive and potentially productive agricultural lands. Agricultural Element Policy AG 1.12 directs the county to develop the Agricultural Conservation Mitigation Program to mitigate the loss of farmland to development, which is what the ordinance implements. The hearing body process began in May. Apologies. There we go. Sorry about that. The hearing body process began in May of 2022 with 3 separate workshops conducted at the Agricultural Advisory Committee. Staff then conducted a workshop with the Planning Commission in October of 2022. The Planning Commission directed staff to return to the AAC to work with this AAC subcommittee and return to the Planning Commission with a draft ordinance. For the past year, staff worked with the subcommittee and the AAC to refine the draft ordinance to bring before the Planning Commission. Staff returned to the AAC at their September 2023 meeting, and the AAC recommended the ordinance with modifications to the Planning Commission. Staff returned to the Planning Commission at their November 8th, 2023 meeting, and the Planning Commission recommended the ordinance and requested that staff respond to Planning Commission recommendations before staff presented the proposed ordinance to the Board of Supervisors. Staff has incorporated the Planning Commission's requests along with other changes for clarification after an internal review with county staff and county council. These changes are minor and are included in the draft ordinance that is presented before the Board of Supervisors. Staff conducted 3 public meetings in July of 2022. Throughout the ordinance development process, staff met with Monterey County community organizations, land trusts, building industry groups, and agricultural organizations and water quality and quantity organizations. Staff met with governmental agencies that had a relevant nexus with this policy. Staff would like to note that the Agricultural Element Policy AG 1.12 suggests that the county work with the Salinas Valley cities to develop a countywide mitigation program. Staff is separately participating in discussions with the cities in LAFCO to identify opportunities for ag mitigation consistency across jurisdictions. Staff will continue to meet with the Salinas Valley cities in LAFCO to discuss the development of a broader valley-wide mitigation program, which is separate from this ordinance. On November 8th, the Planning Commission recommended that the Board of Supervisors adopt regulations to mitigate for development on farmland, with additional recommendations that staff review 2 key sections of the proposed ordinance before staff brought the proposed ordinance before the Board of Supervisors. In response to the Planning Commission's first request, staff modified the definition of good faith effort to ensure that the definition clearly articulated the requirements of the applicant and that it was clear what evidence the applicant shall present to the appropriate authority. These updates made it clear what the appropriate authority requires to be able to make a decision on the applicant's effort and that the applicant has been able to satisfy a good faith effort. Staff also made modifications throughout the proposed ordinance to state that the applicant and not the qualifying conservation entity are responsible for providing documentation to the appropriate authority. In response to the Planning Commission's second request, staff made 2 modifications in the ordinance to ensure that the water on the mitigation land is protected and that poor quality lands with compromised water cannot be used to satisfy the mitigation requirements in the proposed ordinance. These updates ensure that the mitigation land's water is better protected for continued agricultural operations and that conservation easements or deed restriction language is clear and that the mitigation land shall protect and retain the mitigation land's water supply. In addition, if the board desires, Attachment B includes additional options that the board could review and that staff could add to the mitigation land requirements, which staff can review if the board desires. The draft ordinance is broken down into sections 10 through 90, which staff will now review in the subsequent slides. The purpose of the Farmland Mitigation Ordinance is to provide clear and consistent policies to mitigate the loss of farmland, to protect productive and potentially productive farmland, to ensure commercial viability of the county's agricultural industry, and to encourage growth in or near developed or developing areas. The applicability section of the ordinance, which details projects that are required to mitigate via the ordinance. This section in particular clearly states what projects are exempt from mitigation. The general plan agricultural element AG 1.12 required that staff exempt inclusionary and affordable housing. Other exemptions included in the ordinance were added during the outreach and hearing body process. These other exemptions are summarized above and are agricultural employee housing, agricultural processing plant, agricultural support service, groundwater quantity and quality projects, and uses identified in the agricultural winery corridor plan that are in the agricultural and winery corridor plan area. There are 3 types of projects that would require the applicant to mitigate the loss of agricultural land. If the land use designation is changed from an agricultural designation, such as farmland, permanent grazing, and rural grazing, to any other land use designation, if the project requires a use permit or administrative permit where prime or statewide unique and local farmland is converted to non-agricultural use, if the project requires a variance for exceeding the maximum building site coverage, it would also be required to mitigate through the regulations. Staff would also like to briefly note that while agricultural roadways would be exempt from mitigation pursuant to the draft ordinance, non-agricultural roadways would be required to mitigate pursuant to the draft ordinance and may also be required to mitigate pursuant to the environmental review process necessitated through the California Environmental Quality Act. In addition, non-agricultural roadways would require mitigation as this would convert farmland to non-agricultural use and may necessitate a zoning district or land use change. The draft ordinance establishes a farmland mitigation plan, which details the minimum requirements that applicants must provide to the county upon application submittal and before the application is considered by the appropriate authority. This slide briefly details some of those requirements, such as minimum requirements when the application is submitted and when the application is considered by the appropriate authority. Staff would like to briefly review some of the important definitions in the definitions section, specifically farmland classification categories, as they are critical to how mitigation ratios in the ordinance are determined. Staff utilized the State of California Department of Farmland Conservation Mapping and Monitoring Program to provide farmland classification categories for the ordinance. The ordinance has 2 farmland classification categories, prime farmland and statewide unique and local farmland, which combines farmland of statewide importance, unique farmland, and farmland of local importance. In an effort to balance protecting agricultural land while also ensuring housing development can occur in developing areas of the county, the mitigation ratios were tiered. This result was the development of lower ratios inside of community areas, rural centers, and affordable housing overlays, areas of the county that are already developed and identified in the 2010 general plan as being priority areas for development. Staff will now review the flowchart, which summarizes the text of section 2192.060 to determine an applicant's mitigation ratio. Applicants must first determine if their farmland is inside of a community area, rural center, or affordable housing overlay. If it is, the applicant's mitigation ratio will be lower, as staff previously mentioned. Then, if the applicant's mitigation land is located in a priority area for mitigation, the applicant may be able to adjust their mitigation ratio based on the 4 categories of items that are allowed for an adjustment to the base mitigation ratio. Once applicants have reviewed adjustments to their base mitigation ratio, then they will move to section 21.92.070. Section 21.92.070, Methods of Mitigation, details the mitigation process. I would first like to briefly offer a definition of conservation easements or deed restrictions before I jump into the mitigation process. Conservation easements or deed restrictions are legally recorded mechanisms of protecting farmland by restricting its use to agricultural operations, accessory uses, and other uses consistent with the underlying zoning. The methods of mitigation begin with the applicant first being required to locate a conservation easement or deed restriction, which must first be found within the same planning area as the land being converted. And the mitigation land should not move from a subbasin with exceedances of their minimum thresholds in their groundwater sustainability plan. If the first good faith effort is satisfied and the applicant cannot find mitigation land per the previous requirements, the applicant can then find mitigation land anywhere in the county. All mitigation land must be of substantially the same farmland classification category or better. If, after a second good faith effort is satisfied, the applicant is still unable to locate mitigation land to protect, the applicant can pay in lieu fees to a qualifying conservation entity. Applicants are allowed at any stage of the process to propose alternative and complementary mitigation methods, as long as those methods comply with the requirements in the draft ordinance. I will briefly review the minimum requirements for easements, deed restrictions, in lieu fees, and alternative and complementary mitigation, which are summarized on this slide. For all easements or deed restrictions, there are minimum terms, minimum requirements of the proposed mitigation land, and that the qualifying conservation entity hold the easement or deed restriction. For all in lieu fees, the in lieu fees must be determined by using the appraised fair market value of acquiring a conservation easement on the land being converted. The fees must be paid to the qualifying conservation entity, and the Agricultural Advisory Committee, or AAC, reviews and recommends the proposed fee payment to the appropriate authority. For all alternative and complementary mitigation, the mitigation value must be determined by using the appraised fair market value of acquiring a conservation easement or deed restriction on the land being converted. Up to 5% alternative and complementary mitigation can be proposed, and if the applicant is proposing more than 5% alternative and complementary mitigation, they must provide proof that the mitigation is as protective as an easement or deed restriction of a similar acreage or value, and that the Agricultural Advisory Committee reviews and recommends the proposed alternative and complementary mitigation methods to the appropriate authority. The draft ordinance has minimum requirements for the land that is being protected with an easement or deed restriction, or the land that is purchased by a qualifying conservation entity with in lieu fees. This slide summarizes the minimum requirements for the mitigation land, such as it must be farmland in an agricultural zone, it must be of substantially equivalent farmland classification category or better, and the water supply must be available for continued agricultural operations and use. Staff understands that the timing of mitigation can impact how the costs of mitigation are amortized into the development of a project. If mitigation is required early in the process, the mitigation costs may decrease the value of the development rights of the agricultural land. If mitigation is required later in the process, the mitigation costs may be more likely to be included in the vertical costs of development. To balance these competing interests, staff developed the requirements in the timing of mitigation section, which are summarized on this slide and vary depending on the type of project that requires mitigation. The proposed ordinance includes minimum requirements for the qualifying conservation entity. The minimum requirements are the qualifying conservation entity must be a nonprofit that operates locally and has direct knowledge and experience working locally. Their primary purpose is conserving and maintaining agricultural lands in production. They have an annual monitoring and reporting program where the qualifying conservation entity enforces and monitors the easement or deed restriction for compliance with the terms of the easement or deed restriction. If the qualifying conservation entity receives in lieu fees, they must keep the in lieu fees in a separate account, which will be used to acquire a conservation easement or deed restriction, and the appropriate authority shall determine whether the entity qualifies as a qualifying conservation entity per the requirements in the draft ordinance. Staff requests that the Board of Supervisors find the ordinance categorically exempt from SEQA review pursuant to Section 15308, Actions by a Regulatory Agency for Protection of the Environment. Staff requests that the Board of Supervisors find and consider the ordinance consistent within the scope of the previously certified final environmental impact report for the 2010 General Plan pursuant to Section 15162. Staff requests that the Board of Supervisors adopt an ordinance adding Chapter 2192 Inland, establishing regulations to mitigate for development on farmland. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board at this time point? Should I go out to the public?
So, Mr. Chair, are we thinking we're having this first hearing on it? We're going to have a second follow-up, or we'll take action at a separate meeting, right? Because I hope that we just give more opportunities to the public to weigh in. I hear Supervisor Lopez said he still has we're still meeting with stakeholders on this. A big issue for sure. And I thank our staff for working on this. I know this is taking some time to get here, but it does have major implications. As we know, we live in a new world where now local governments, county, cities have a greater obligation or greater challenge ahead of us to meet our regional housing needs assessment numbers now over the next 7 years, because it included 2023. So by 2031, our county, if we're going to meet these RENA requirements, has to build over, I think, 20,300 units of housing, most of those to the cities, or 3,300 to the county. So the reason I'm concerned is that meeting our housing needs is easier said than done. And this is one of those topics that add a layer of complexity, added layer of cost, and so that's where I'm cognizant of how this kind of policy could impact our ability to meet our housing goals for the state. That is now tied with accountability measures, not only to face lawsuits, but to perhaps losing housing and transportation dollars now that are tied with it's the teeth provided in state law if we don't meet our RENA numbers. So I know that's a reality, but we have some big proposed projects in the Salinas Valley. So the Salinas sphere of influence, that was dealt with a few years ago, but the city of Gonzales, the city of Soledad are the next big housing projects that are difficult to get through every layer of every step of the process, LAFCO being one of those. But what this could do is add cost and make it more difficult for any potential developer to want to move forward on a project. It already is. The market conditions now are very difficult because construction costs are very high. There's a scarcity in the labor force. There are materials that are at an all-time high. We're competing with other areas like the Silicon Valley, where most construction is happening. If you talk to anybody in the building and construction trades, so I just want to take a closer look at this. How is this going to help Monterey County meet our housing goals, and not add such a significant cost that will disincentivize developers from wanting to build housing? And I'll give you an example, because I represent most of the city of Salinas. This area is actually in Glenn's district, but in that area along Baranda Road, near the Lowe's Shopping Center, that was the future planned housing for Salinas. And a big chunk of how they're going to meet their housing goals that's been talked about for years, but there's been no groundbreaking. And just to give the public an example, now the school districts are suing the developer because they're going to build housing when it needs some new schools. That's an added cost to any project as well. So now we're talking about this. So my question would be on this land mitigation. Most of the time it means buying easements on other farmland to prevent the ability to develop on those acres in perpetuity, right? And that's why you get a nonprofit that gets the money, they monitor, they ensure that it will not be sold in the future and be developed. How much does that cost? What's the number? Because I know we're dealing with some real projects along the 101 corridor to build potential housing, but what does it cost? How much does that add to the per unit for housing, or how much does it cost per acre to be able to purchase that agreement, even if, you have to buy it from a willing seller?
Yeah, thank you. If we may, through the chair. So just really briefly, before we answer that specific question, just a couple of comments that I just want to be sure is clear. This ordinance only relates to unincorporated areas in Monterey County. So any of the development that would be proposed through any of the cities that would be annexed, they're not subject to this regulation. The other thing I just wanted to make sure is clear. This regulation does establish guidelines for mitigation. It does not substitute or replace CEQA analysis, and so there can also be mitigation required through CEQA. So, and generally how we tried to structure this was to help make it easier and try to incentivize keeping the building of housing and other development near developed areas in the unincorporated areas while doing the best we could to protect sort of the broader ag lands and expanses of ag lands. With that, Mr. Price will actually respond to your direct question, but just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Yeah, thank you. But I know there was a timely topic in the LAFCO meeting yesterday, right? So that's why I bring it up. So the LAFCO policy will deal with annexations into the city limits on this issue, and that was voted on yesterday. This would be outside of that type of process of annexation into city limits.
That's correct. This is only unincorporated development, not annexations.
But it would be good to have some kind of uniformity, right, with LAFCO and the county versus that they have a standard and then we do something different in the unincorporated Montana County. It would be nice to have some consistency for future housing and development within the county, if that's possible.
Yeah, we agree as much consistency as possible is better for the development community and the ag community. There is also a difference, though. We recognize we want to see more open space ag lands in unincorporated areas and more development within incorporated cities. And so there are some differences as well where I would hope the cities could be more aggressive with building housing. We recognize them as important partners for providing housing, while, yes, the county still being able to meet our requirements for housing in those focused areas. So yeah, we hope to have them as in sync as possible and have been in those discussions. But there's some differences as well between, I think, what incorporated cities and annexation projects can do versus the unincorporated areas and areas we're trying to protect.
Go ahead, and then I'll give my last comment.
Yes, just briefly, at the August 2023 LAFCO, there were estimates presented about the cost of acquiring a conservation easement or deed restriction, and it was generally estimated to be in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 per acre, and a kind of typical single-family density of about 8 to 10 units per acre. The easement purchase would cost roughly about $1,500 to $2,500 per unit, and that this cost would be somewhere in the range of 3 to 5% of the total fees associated with the development and probably less than 1% of the total cost of developing the residential unit.
Right. And so the last comment just to that is that the 3 to 5%, it all adds up, right? Then you talk about the traffic impact fees, the school fees. I mean, there's a significant cost when it all adds up. And then if we're trying to realize housing for working families with the average incomes that we see in our county, that could make a house out of the reach of our families. So that was the only last thing I would say to the previous comment was that nonetheless, we have an obligation to construct 3,300 units plus of housing in unincorporated Monterey County. And so it's still a factor, not as big as Monterey, City of Salinas. I think Gonzales is third on that list of the cities that need to build the most housing, but we're still pretty significant and a big task ahead of us if we're going to achieve those goals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a question here too, and you made a reference that non-agricultural use roads need to be mitigated, agricultural roads do not. Unfortunately, the roadways don't get cut across that way too well unless you have something that's banning trucks on a particular road. So could you give a little more definition and just how we draw that fine line between what is a a commuter road basically as opposed to an ag road? I look at something like Davis Road out here. It gets used by both. How would you qualify that? There's River Road. There's new roads that would be developed, obviously within developments that would be specifically used for non-ag use. But some of the other roads around gets a little fuzzier.
Yes, so the public roadways, those would be required to mitigate kind of those larger roadways. Agricultural roadways, those would be ones that are just for the on-site operations of that agricultural site. So for example, just getting from one side of your agricultural property to the other side, that would be an example of an ag roadway.
Okay, that sounds like it's a very small definition in that way then. Okay. Oh, I think, okay, do you want to go to public comment here at this point? Yes. All right, is there anybody in the chambers that would like to speak on this? Yes, Mr. Del Piero, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Mark Del Piero. I'm here on behalf of the Ag Land Trust. Given the explanation provided by your staff today, we strongly recommend that the board vote in favor of this ordinance. The clarifications that have been provided in the staff report satisfy our concerns. There has been a monumental effort to complete this ordinance that is mandated by your general plan. It has been mandated by your general plan since 2010. We think that in order for you to be in compliance with your general plan and avoid third-party lawsuits, the effort that's been expended by your staff and your planning commission to get this to you today reflects their ongoing concern and their commitment to farmland preservation. So we strongly encourage you all to vote in favor of the work products that has been produced in compliance with the general plan over the past 12 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you for considering this important topic. I've been tracking it closely and participated in a number of agricultural advisory subcommittee meetings where details were worked through. I greatly appreciate planners Taylor and Melanie for listening intently and gathering wide-ranging feedback from those of us involved. I think it could have devolved into herding cats very easily, but they did a great job keeping things on the rails, so thank you very much. There are 3 areas for improvement that I'd like to suggest in the ordinance. Number 1, I suggest the county consider removing the requirement that conservation easements or deed restrictions be held by third-party qualifying conservation entities. The resulting arrangement would be more similar to deed restrictions on affordable housing. No third-party monitor is involved for those deed restrictions. This lowers cost and complexity. Secondly, I suggest that base mitigation ratios for projects located within community areas and rural centers be lowered further. The ratios are already reduced in the proposed ordinance, but I'm suggesting they be lowered even further. Number 3, I suggest that the projects of a certain density, perhaps 20 dwelling units an acre, receive a reduction or elimination of the mitigation requirement. This is a new concept not incorporated into the draft ordinance currently. The concept will incentivize projects to use land more efficiently on a per unit basis, in turn reducing the quantity of ag land consumed by development in the first place. So, as Supervisor Alejo pointed out, this policy is coming at a critical time in light of the county's RHNA allocations. It will certainly add to the cost and complexity of building housing. If we must implement this policy, it should work to incentivize housing that uses land efficiently and that is well placed while minimizing cost piled onto development, specifically housing. I didn't plan on speaking to this until I heard Supervisor Alejo's comments, but I'll give some color to, I guess I won't, but would be happy to talk to you offline about impact fees.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the chambers that would like to speak on this matter? Is there anybody online?
Norm Groot?
Yes, Mr. Groot, you have 2 minutes. Norm, are you on there?
He still is. There he goes.
Can you hear me now?
Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Please go ahead and speak.
Okay, thank you. I am speaking, Norm Groot for Farm Bureau Monterey. I'm speaking in favor of adoption of this ordinance. First, want to thank Ms. Beretti and Mr. Price for all the hours and time that they put into the collaboration with the community and the stakeholders on developing this. Many, many hours have gone into this, and I count 19 months worth of development on this particular ordinance. I wanted to quickly support what Supervisor Alejo was saying about development opportunities. And believe me, we had many conversations about how we were going to meet the housing mandate and have this mitigation policy in place. So your thoughts are heard here too, but they are items that we've already discussed. And I think really what we're getting to here is that the prioritization of development should be within the community boundary lines as exemplified by the lower mitigation rates for those areas. We are trying to avoid the hopscotch development throughout the valley and really point those that direction towards the community areas. Finally, I wanted to say on the exemptions that, we talked about a lot of those over and over and came to those concise list of exemptions, particularly for farm worker housing. We think it's critically important that we keep farm worker housing as an exemption to continue the great developments that we've already seen in the county and many more to come. So summarizing here, we support the ordinance and the development as it's gone through the process here, and particularly with the comments that were made at the Planning Commission, and urge your adoption of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on?
Yes, Laura.
Yes, Laura, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Laura Davis. I'm the Deputy Director of Landwatch Monterey County, and I'll be offering comments on behalf of Landwatch. Landwatch supports this ordinance. However, we suggest that the base mitigation ratio be lowered for a conservation easement or deed restriction on permanent growth boundaries. Instead of the current proposed reduction of 0.125, we suggest 0.25. These lands present a unique and critical opportunity for implementing permanent growth boundaries, and we recommend a greater reduction to incentivize the creation of these boundaries. Second, in order to direct growth to community areas, rural centers, and affordable housing overlays, and to discourage development outside of these growth areas, Landwatch recommends that the base mitigation ratio be lowered by 0.125 for development in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no others online? Nobody else in the chambers? Last call. Close public comment. At this point, do you have comments, Supervisor?
Yeah, so just happy with the work. What caught me is obviously the overlap with the LAFCO process, and my conversations with community members is I made my calls Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. A lot of them shared with me they had not had time to look at it given their focus on the LAFCO work. And so I'm not saying that I have strong opposition to anything in it. I just need a little more time to finish those conversations with community members before I am ready to vote. But I know, having been part of this process since the beginning, being on the list of places you held community meetings and being a convener for many of those meetings with the South County community leadership, the work that has gone into this, and I really appreciate it. So overall, I'm generally supportive. I just need to finish my conversations before I cast a vote on this one, but I appreciate all the work that's gone in thus far and look forward to hopefully seeing it in 2 weeks.
Supervisor Askew?
Thank you. Someone said monumental effort to get this this done, and I would agree. And we've been tracking it as well. And the amount of public outreach, the amount of conversations, the depth of engagement is commendable. And I just want to say thank you to the team. I know you guys have a lot on your plate, and this was one more thing. So. I'm also generally supportive of everything we see here. I think it does a really good job of saying, like, how do we use ag mitigation to incentivize development where and how we want to see development happening. That's something I wish we could have done better in the LAFCO process. So thank you for the depth of thought that went into putting this together. It's not just a straight, one-to-one kind of thing where it does acknowledge, it says, there are places where we want to see development happening, and we're gonna take action to make it easier and cheaper to get development to happen in those locations. That's how I think we can use ag mitigation policies to both protect our prime farmland, which is the foundation of who we are as a county, while also making sure that we're addressing the housing needs of our local workforce, of our families, of our retirees, of everyone who wants to call Monterey County home. So thank you for that. I just wanted, in response to some of the suggestions that were made around further incentivizing the development of housing that are within community centers, that makes sense to me. That's where I want to see growth happening. And I think if we can take further action to make it easier and cheaper for our development to happen in those locations, I'm in favor of that. I would also be in favor of having additional incentives or adjustments to base mitigation ratios for higher density developments. We talk about the cost of ag mitigation per housing unit. I think the time of building, especially when you're taking prime ag land and turning it into 8 to 10 units per acre, that's urban sprawl. That's urban sprawl utilizing some of our most valuable resources that we have. That's crazy to me. If we're going to be talking about development on prime ag land in those ways, we need to be talking about at least less than 20 units per acre, which brings our cost per unit down to something less than $500. So I think the policy that we have is how we get to incentivize that type of development in the locations that we want it. So I'm supportive of both of reduced mitigation amounts for both of those types of higher density in community centers where we already have development happening and people living. The one question that I had was around the change in land use change, and there was quite a bit of discussion about that at LAFCO, and I was just wondering, are you able to comment on how what we have drafted here differs from what LAFCO landed on yesterday? If you are able, if you're not, that's okay.
No, through the chair. Apologies, staff was not able to listen in on the LAFCO discussion. We were going to go back and watch the video.
Totally fair. All right, appreciate that. And then my last suggestion was around, again, trying to find ways to avoid the hopscotch development. And really and I appreciate our commitment, like we've got to get housing built. There is not unlimited land to sprawl onto forever in every community. So we are going to have to think about where those lines of infill development are going to have. We're going to set ourselves up for that in the future. And so I think as we think about base mitigation ratios and looking at if you're able to get a conservation easement that's along a permanent growth boundary, I think that's also the type of mitigation that we should be supporting. So, maybe there's some way, I'm happy again to support it as it's written here, but if there's a way to consider, again, a reduced ratio if the conservation easement is happening in one of those key locations, I'd be comfortable seeing that change as well. So with that, I just thank all the folks that took their time to weigh in so significantly on this, and look forward to having some further discussion when we have the rest of our colleagues back again in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Yes, right. I also want to express my thanks here for staff and for the community. This has been a long process. It's everybody's put a lot of sweat and time into this, and it's coming together as a proposal. I think that has some general support onto there. I look at this. I support it. I think this is very good. I fully support any efforts as Supervisor Askew made on how we can get more than 20 units or more on a parcel, on a per acre, I should say, because that's going right up the line. I speak about in terms that we need to have smaller homes is the way we really deal with this, and it reduces a lot of costs as well. But under the awareness that we're short one supervisor today, we just lost one. I think the general consensus of the board is that we probably need to continue this. If somebody wants to make a motion,
yeah, you want a date specific in 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Our county council. So I would say we'll table this item, bring this back in 2 weeks, which would be March 12th. Is that good? That's the right date?
At a certain time, 1:30.
At 1:30. That way, in the afternoon. All right, that would be the motion. And like I said, I think I brought it up. Supervisor Askew, just to hopefully get the info from LAFCO so we could have that add that into our discussion as well. Thank you.
Do we have a second on that? Second, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Sorry, yes.
Staff just has one quick clarification. I want to be clear. So we'll return in 2 weeks. We'll return with the ordinance as is, but I heard both a clarification on land use designation for LAFCO, and am I understanding correctly that you would like us to prepare some alternatives for the reduced mitigation that were discussed? Is that something that is a part of the motion, that we prepare options for the board to consider?
It would be nice to have options, just so then we don't have to postpone everything that's properly noticed, and just put some on the table and then let the board decide, you know.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted clarification on that.
Thank you.
Did you say aye? All
Yes,
in
we-
favor?
yes, we
Okay,
did.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, we all pass it. It's okay, it's a long day. Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to other board matters, which would be our CAO's comments for the week.
Yes, Supervisor, Chair Church, today is the first day that I'm going to share information from our departments that they've shared with me of the good work that's being done. Today is Ag Commissioner's accomplishments, and just a quick overview of the different items that they've covered throughout the course of the last year. Juan Hidalgo just reached the 1 year at this month with our county, and the amount of involvement that he's had through our dealing with the storms, but also with our partners in the ag industry, and the impacts has been tremendous. And that includes outreach related to erosion awareness. As you know, in Bolsa Knolls has been one of the main locations that we've discussed. The use of pesticides, and continuing education workshops to the community, and also safe and effective use of these pesticides in addition to the regulatory requirements. Flood preparedness and awareness flyers were distributed in December, and they provide resources for controlling water runoff and prior to the rain season, and that's been in partnership with the Resource Conservation District. In addition to that, last spring, they did launch the Ag Pass program, which came before your board, and there is a current open sign-up period for 2024. This program allows commercial agricultural operators access to their property in emergencies to conduct limited activities. The crop report was compiled and the data has been published, and also flood damage assessments from January and March 2023 included the survey of agricultural industry losses due to flooding, and also provided recovery resources to the community. Lastly, there was issued a total of 18,971 phytosanitary certificates for commodity experts, and that is all just a portion of the work that's been done by our Agricultural Commissioner's Office. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to item 32, which is new referrals. There is one of those.
Yes, and this is just to share that the new referral was received from Supervisor Glenn Church, and it is to bring clarity and accountability to the current guidelines for requesting and promulgating ceremonial documents from the County of Monterey Board of Supervisors, the Chair of the Board of Supervisors, and from individual supervisorial offices, and a policy is suggested, and this has been assigned to our board clerk, Valerie Ralph.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make some comments on the referral. I think every chairman is a little different, because when you're chair, you not only facilitate all these meetings and the agenda review, but you get all the requests, and you get them from everybody for resolutions, either from a retiring employees, a special day from the department head who wants to recognize, and then all the different requests from the community. So I get that there needs to be some structure there, but just for in the future, I think every chair has their own style, their own leadership, right? And obviously, this drove you to want to just, I guess, formalize it or put it in writing more. But I know that the one thing that did take a lot of time, my staff luckily did a lot of it. That I know this, it says here, staff should edit both content and copy prior to sending the office to the chair of the board and the clerk of the board. They should, but I found myself and my staff having to do a lot of editing and formatting, to proper formatting. So it's nice on that saved Valerie and her team time. They're very busy. And I am, like when Mary was on, she wanted it by a certain date. When I was chair, if it was possible, we were a lot more flexible on a last minute request. But and I know that was a little bit more stressful for Valerie and her team. But I was trying to be accommodating to my colleagues because I know things come up out of the blue. But I just wanted to point out that the editing and portion part, because what happens is that sometimes you get it in print, and I know this happened to us a few times, Valerie, even with our check, we found some mistakes and things like that. So I would just caution that even though it should come in a perfect, it doesn't always, and it's the chair's team that has to do a lot of that editing work. So
yeah, we've learned that.
That's why when my term was up, my side were like, well, okay, that's a lot of time.
There are a couple of things, and also inside the policy we have. For example, there's a certificate of merit, and I've never seen anybody give a certificate of merit. I don't know what it is. So trying to clean up a couple of things along that line is what this is meant for as well.
Yeah, and everybody has like their own certificate. Obviously, from our own offices, we give out our own.
It's more of a proclamation, though.
No, we give. It varies. Every office. Sometimes they call them office proclamations, just from us as individual supervisors. Or, I made when I became a supervisor. They had kind of not a nice certificate for my predecessor, so I used the template that we used to have in Sacramento because they used to have an office called the Speaker's Office of Member Services, and it was a whole department that helped with nice frames and certificates, and so I used that to kind of make the one I have now, but it's paid through my office budget to hand those out to folks. And the frames, I frame my own certificates, not all of them, but most of them, to give them, but it comes from office budget as well. But I just want to make sure that we have that kind of flexibility to continue to do that, but I get it, it's very stressful for you and your team dealing with all these requests that come all at once.
Just looking at a few things that might need to be changed. I'm sure when the clerk of the board brings this back, there will be unanimity on this immediately. So, yeah.
It's your year, so yeah. Whatever makes it easier.
Supervisor Askew, do you want to weigh in on this?
Another quick comment, and having drafted the policy that we use now as a staffer 10 years ago, I definitely think it needs to be updated, and so I'm looking forward to that discussion. I will say on the draft that came to us, where it calls out the chair's resolutions as not showing up on the agenda. I think from the feedback we hear from community, and I get it takes a lot of time, but it's really meaningful to be able to have presentations on the agenda, resolutions on the agenda and presented here. So we had previously had a chair's resolution as a type of resolution where it was only signed by the chair. And it turned out nobody ever wanted to use that. I think the board appreciates having their signature on all of the resolutions. So as we have our real conversation about it, it definitely needs to be updated. But I think that keeping the opportunity of having a broader range put on the agenda, and maybe putting a limit of how many each supervisor can bring forward when they're not chair would be one way to sort of manage the time. So that would be my suggestion.
All right.
But thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to board comments then. Either one of you want to start? There's a small pool to choose from today.
Let's wrap it up.
Incredible speaker at the CSUMB All Black Gala this last weekend. Turns out it was I'm going to get his name wrong, but Conscious Lee is his username, the Conscious Lee on social media. Turns out I already followed him, but great conversation about what we mean when we talk about Black excellence and proximity to whiteness and proximity to white supremacy. Really, really compelling speaker and great follow-up conversations. I just want to also recognize Miss Ruthie Watts for being recognized at the event. Just wonderful group of folks. And then I want to invite everyone, we're having a town hall. Really, this is one of the most exciting things that I've had the honor of being a part of since I've been on the board. But we're having a town hall on Thursday, February 29th at the Oldemire Center, starting at 6 p.m. We'll be serving dinner and drinks, but we're going to be talking about the initial scoping of the property that the county owns on Broadway, the current social services building. And what we're looking at right now is the opportunity to redesign that site, rebuild that site, reinvest in the community of Seaside, following the long time loss of resources following the closure of Fort Ord, but we're looking at bringing the library to a new location that's more accessible. We're looking at making sure that we have social services that are accessible to families. We're looking at a family justice center in partnership with the district attorney's office. We're looking at having a potential child care site and child support services all co-located in one location that's accessible on a transit corridor, serving the entire western half of our county. So we're inviting everyone to come out, take a look at sort of what we're thinking about, and provide some feedback that we can send back to the county planning team so that we can move forward with something that's going to work for the community. So everyone's invited. We'll be having, like I said, we'll have dinner, and we'll hopefully have some great conversation and collect some great feedback from community.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank the California State Association of Counties for inviting me to be their speaker representing CSAC in Los Angeles last Wednesday at a press conference with U.S. Senator Alex Padilla and Congressmember Ted Lieu, who reintroduced their Housing for All legislation that will provide additional federal buckets to address our housing and homelessness crisis. It's an ongoing effort, and we know that when we have our federal officials, despite the challenges in Washington these days, it's important to keep fighting, keep trying to push legislation that would help us have additional resources to address the greatest challenges of our time. Here locally, one thing I didn't mention, we had the Steinbeck event last weekend that Supervisor Askew staff was at, but also First Methodist Church here, just a couple blocks away. Pastor Steve London, who does a lot for homeless residents, they just celebrated a remodeled church, a kitchen, I think a dining room area, bathrooms. And I just want to thank Pastor Steve, and I hope to honor him in the next few weeks here, just because he is retiring, and I know the church is looking for a new pastor to lead that congregation. Since Mary's not here, I'll just announce that we're joining the Hospitality Association's, their awards gala this Friday. I know that's an important event for our hospitality industry every year. And last but not least, we didn't meet for 2 weeks. I think it was February 6th, and we don't meet next week, right? Next Friday, next Tuesday, there's no meeting, March 5th. It is election day. So I just want to encourage our residents, get out there and vote. And I thank our elections department and all the volunteers who go staff those voting booths and halls all throughout the county. Just want to say thank you, but it's important to get your vote in. And now you don't even require a stamp to put it in the mail. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I want to second that on the voting. The turnout this year is abysmally low, so I do hope people who have their ballots will get them in or postmarked by March 5th. I had a couple things I wanted to bring up. I did speak on last Friday at Hartnell College for the Salinas Valley Chamber of Commerce. Speakers were Speaker Rivas, Senator John Laird, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, myself, of course, and Supervisor Lopez. It was a very early morning event and nice little breakfast. Want to also mention for in my district on March 2nd, there is a volunteer day at the Aromas Community Park, where it's a very large park that's slowly being built up, and all by the community there. It's a great asset to that community. I also am having our first town hall at Oak Hills on March 13th. That's still a couple weeks away. It'll be at the Castroville Rec Center. And next meeting is the 12th, so I'm going to announce that now and then announce it again. I also want to just mention for North County in Aromas, the passing of a longtime activist in the community, gentleman by the name of Mark Booz, who was a local leader and serving youth, both with the Girl Scouts of Central Coast as Organization Development Director. He's a longtime Scoutmaster, a Boy Scout Troop 504 in Aromas. He's a beloved figure there, giving countless hours to various causes. A real role model, including for my two stepsons who were Scouts underneath him. And he passed away at 66, had served in the Marine Corps as well. With that, I want to turn to County Council for any readouts.
There's no reportable action for the Board of Supervisors for the County of Monterey and the Monterey County Water Resources Agency.
Thank you. And with that, we are going to close and adjourn in memory of Sarah Hernandez and Amanda Oates. Supervisor Alejo, you have a... yes.
Yes, this is on behalf of myself and Valerie. We're both former Monterey County Court employees. But this adjourn in memory for Amanda Susan Oates was submitted by Sally Lopez, Kelly Chambers, Monterey County Superior Court employees and indebted friends and confidants to Amanda Oates. Amanda Susan Oates was born on March 13, 1969 in Sacramento, California. She sadly passed away on Friday, February 23rd of this year in San Jose. She had attended and graduated from Valley High School in Sacramento, and she had attended UCSC and UC Irvine, where she majored in psychology. She was hired by the Superior Court on December of '97 and worked as a deputy court clerk 2, promoted to deputy court clerk 3, and then promoted to a supervisor. She worked in the criminal department, court services, and appeal and in traffic, and she worked in the Salinas Division, King City Division, and ultimately in the Marina Division. Upon leaving the court, she was hired by the Santa Cruz District Attorney's Office in 2018 as a legal secretary. She lived in Sacramento, King City, Salinas, and ultimately Santa Cruz. And Amanda had a great personality, and she shared her knowledge and had great friendships with clerical staff, managers, judges, deputies from the Monterey County Sheriff's Department. She maintained cordial friendships with staff from the Monterey County District Attorney's Office and the Monterey County Public Defenders. Amanda was full of knowledge. She loved reading books, watching documentaries, traveling, going to theatrical shows, and she was a supportive supervisor who mentored, inspired, and encouraged everyone fortunate enough to know her and work with her to reach their goals, often becoming their fiercest cheerleader. She had a sarcastic wit and was amused by historical and literary humor, and she was a proud aunt who worked hard to pass those traits to her nieces and nephews. In her spare time, she loved football Sundays, played at the ballpark, and watched Scottish games at Celtic festivals. She had an appreciation for animals and opened her home to foster pets. Amanda was a supportive supervisor who mentored, inspired, and encouraged everyone. I already read that part. And in her spare time, I think I read that too. She will be missed, and Monterey County Board of Supervisors today adjourns in her memory. And Valerie, if I can provide a celebration of life proclamation from my office for her family, I'd be proud to do that, and may she rest in peace. Thank you.
And the other person we are going to be adjourned in memory of is Sarah Hernandez, who is a member of our public defender family. Do we have folks from the audience that would know her better than I would like to speak on that? Feel free to. Thank you.
So hello, Sarah Hernandez. So Jesus, I had Administrative Secretary Confidential for the Monterey County Public Defender's Office. So I've known Sarah Hernandez. She was actually one of the people who hired me 2.5 years ago when I first started with the Public Defender's Office. Oh, sorry. She was my supervisor for about 6 months before I got promoted to the position I hold now, and since then has become a near and dear friend. Last August, she was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer and fought valiantly, hardly. A strong, brave woman, single mother of 3, and dedicated her life to public service from the city attorney's office to the court, the DA's office, before ending up here as supervising legal secretary. All I can say is she will be dearly missed by not only her staff, not only her family, her friends, her community, and her impact will forever be ingrained in Monterey County. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus, for those heartfelt comments. With that, we will adjourn the Board of Supervisors and the Board of Supervisors of the Monterey County Water Resources Agency.
All right. Got through it, Glenn.